This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 23. Today we have Colonel Andrew Hall with us. Andrew is a professor at Marymount University, retired Army colonel, researcher at IDA, which I'm looking forward to hearing about here in just a minute, and has a long service history in the cybersecurity space. So thank you very much, Andy, for being here.
Thanks. It's good to be here. We're with you today.
Awesome. So you are a West Point graduate and also spent some time as a professor there. I think a few tours of being a professor there, if I recall correctly. And then you have a pretty long career in cybersecurity. So I'd love to just start off and hear about your journey. How did you decide in a career in the military? And then also, how did you get into cybersecurity?
Well, when I was in high school, I thought that going to West Point sounded like a really neat opportunity. And my mathematics and computer science professors were the same person, and they suggested that I study mathematics at West Point because at the time they weren't sure that they exactly knew what computer science would actually be to study.
Yeah.
And I got to West Point, and the IEEE and ACM had just come up with what the standards were for a curriculum in computer science, and so I decided it was time to go and study computer science. So I leaving West Point, I was commissioned into the infantry, but one of the things that at that time we knew was going to happen is that down the road we were going to get a secondary specialty. And being with a computer science degree, it was pretty likely that I'd get a chance to do systems automation, which is what we kind of called cybersecurity at the time. And so I was looking forward to getting a chance to do that as a captain, which was part of all of the tours back at West Point, was getting a chance to do the more academic side of the Army in addition to starting out in the infantry side.
You know, what year was that approximately?
So I got to West Point in 1987 and then graduated in 91. So it
Okay.
was really right when they were first setting up the how computers would be
Yeah.
used in education. We were the class of '90 were the first classes to get issued computers, so we all had a Zenith 248 on
Nice.
our desk as freshmen, and it was pretty funny when they would make an announcement over the loudspeaker, for everyone to come down to Central Guard Room to pick up your updates, and you would walk down to Central Guard Room and get your disks so you could update. Of course, we didn't have hard drives, so update was just updating the disks you were actually going to use. But
Yeah, changing them out. Was back in the early '90s, a lot obviously changed through the '90s and then through the 2000s. Was the nature of, like, I guess, cyber defense or cyber war, was that something that you guys were thinking about, or was that kind of emerging and you were part of it becoming a thing?
I think that I think it would really be merging even in the 2000s,
Yeah.
and we created the United States Cyber Command was ended up getting created in the late 2000s, and that really was an indication that General Alexander and many of those that were in the community thought that we needed to spend more time looking at it. There was a lot of really interesting work that was done in the early days in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan with regard to doing network detection and trying
Mm.
to figure out how to use data and information. But we weren't really looking at cyber warfare the way we are today, where you have this you have a reality that these foreign nation state actors are occasionally attacking us, everything from hospitals to our transportation systems, electrical systems, everything in between.
Yep. Definitely going to ask about that in a second. But so you did your you had a very prestigious military career, a lot of it focused in infantry and cyber. When did you know the whole time that you eventually wanted to be a professor, or was that something that how did you get into that?
Well, when I was finishing my command in Korea, which was in 1997, I had the opportunity to go back and teach at West Point. And so my wife and I were both on active duty and commanding in Korea, and so we thought that going back and teaching at West Point would be a great opportunity to go to grad school and then to give back to what we
Absolutely.
had when we were at West Point. So we got the chance to go to the Naval Postgraduate School, and I got the chance to study applied mathematics. And I really didn't understand how closely aligned applied mathematics and computer science would be. Things like numerical analysis and learning how to code to have better numerical stability of algorithms, or working with large linear programming or linear algebra type systems. Those kinds of you could call them computer science, you can call them mathematics, but they were all a lot of the things that I enjoyed. A lot of the coding and learning how to make algorithms turn into into actual code was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I got a chance to work. I didn't know it at the time, but we were doing a research on space shuttle guidance, and we didn't have the clearance to know that. So my advisor and I were just working on creating this version of a software product, and she had an algorithm that she could code from start to finish. And if she was going to solve a problem, she would just start coding. And the whole notion of parameterization, or the way that a computer scientist would look at passing information around, was not something that she was familiar with, because she was more of an applied mathematician. So you started to see how there was a background in computer science was very nice addition to a applied mathematics type degree.
Yep. And then I know you're at Marymount now doing some. I read a couple of your research papers, or at least browsed them, and I saw some stuff about, and you've mentioned some of the curriculum in terms of, for lack of a better word, maybe readiness or staffing models around cybersecurity in the workforce and in the military. Can you talk a little bit about that, like what nature of research is these days?
Yeah. So when I was in the Army personnel office, or what we call it the Army G1, back in 2013 to 2016. And one of the things that we were working on was how to create the manpower that we would have to do the work we need in the cyber realm. We had gotten some requests for people to come in and do things, and one of the rules when you're requesting things is you can only request what we have. So you can request the aircraft carrier, the Enterprise, but you can't request the Starship Enterprise. And so we didn't really have a stable of people that were main primary job was to do coding for the Army or for the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And so what we really were taking a look at is how do we create a stable of people that will be able to do this work that General Alexander wanted to be done. And so we, in the Army and each of the services, tried to take a look at what our manning or what our force structure would be. And we had two areas that had been doing quite a bit of work in the cyber realm. One is the Signal Corps, which does all of our communications and was responsible for all of what you would consider like the standard IT type work of the Army. But then you also had the Intelligence Corps, and between the two of them, they both were sharing the responsibilities, but we didn't really have somebody that was what we would consider the commander, or the person that was actually leading the offensive fighting. So the military intelligence is always a support function, and the Signal Corps is always a support function. And so we're kind of working through and decided that we needed to have a cyber branch that would be responsible for the warfighting functions that we would have in cyberspace.
When you say warfighting, does the Army consider cyber like, I guess, a combat unit or an offensive or a defensive kind of thing? So are they like protecting the Army and the infrastructure, or is it kind of going against an adversarial or some hybrid?
Well, we consider cyber and cyberspace to be a domain. And so it's like the air or sea, space, land domains. And in each one of those domains, you need both offensive and defensive capabilities. You have to be able to protect your own assets, and you also need to be able to think about how you could use some kind of offensive capability to advance your particular forces if you were in a combat situation against our adversaries.
Yeah. Does the Army take a stance on, like, officially, are we at war when it comes to cyber? I think we all kind of know there's like a gray space. Like, obviously, state actors are attacking, U.S. corporations and things like that. But is there official policy to your knowledge, or how did you guys feel about it?
Well, the way that we are currently looking at it is under a concept that we call multi-domain battle. And in multi-domain battle, you have a continuum. And the continuum starts in a period of competition. And we would view right now that we're in a period of competition between us and our rivals. And then the purpose of the military is to keep us in competition. But if we have to transition into a conflict period, then it's to quickly have the forces so you can return to competition. And so
Yeah.
it's competition, conflict, return to competition is the continuum, because we really don't think that we're going to have unconditional surrender like we had in the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
When you take a look at what's happened since then, there's been very few chances where you really are willing to use all the elements of national power and make someone completely capitulate. And so what we look at it is that we're in this new world of competition. And so the Chinese government is competing, the Russian government is competing, the United States, our allies, we're all competing. And so we're competing in the economic space. We compete diplomatically, we compete in the information environment, and we also will compete in the military environment, but mostly by posturing and having capabilities. And so we bring all these things together into what we would consider to be competition. If you take a look at what's been happening as far as the different reported breaches, I mean, there's pretty clear evidence that there's North Koreans and some of their forces are trying to use cyberspace to create money. We've got you go back to what happened in Georgia and in some of the work that the Russians have done in the Ukraine. You clearly see where the Russians are viewing cyberspace as an important part of their battlefield environment.
Yep.
And with the amount of discussion that has gone on between our administration and the Chinese government, you see that we definitely are trying to protect the intellectual property of our American companies from theft. And that was one of the things that we've been working on is how to ensure that the Chinese government is not supporting the theft of our intellectual property.
Yep. It's such a weird situation because, I think, or at least from the private sector's perspective, attribution's difficult. So you can have a Chinese IP, but maybe it was really coming from Russia and they used the Chinese IP. And then so you're completely in a defensive mode, possibly against state actors. Does the Army, or have you heard anything about when does it go from competition to conflict? Like, does there have to be loss of life involved? Or, if they disrupted the banking sector, or you could prove out some intellectual property theft? Because it seems like a very gray area. It's kind of a gentleman's rule about, how significant this is.
Well, we definitely don't have any published red lines to say that if you go
Yeah.
to this point, then it becomes competition, where it flips over to being warfare. But when you think of transferring from competition into conflict is when you're really bringing all the other elements of national power, where you're really employing the military on the ground, and you start to get into the shooting wars. And so it's one of the conflicts, or one of the hard things to deal with regard to cyberspace, is that so much of the work in the information domain can appear to be going on strictly in competition. And I think that you take a look, and we like to think of the diplomatic, information, military, and the economic tools all being tools of national statecraft, and how you balance those out. I think that we're all trying to make sure that we don't have to use the military portion,
Yeah.
and so that you keep it in the diplomatic, the information, the economic type sanctions to keep, so you never get into that loss of life area.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've never 100% understood is we have a lot of military branches, and then we also have agencies, CIA, FBI. Did you collaborate with them at all from a cybersecurity perspective, or do most of the branches and the different agencies operate somewhat in silos, or do they have roles? Is there some hierarchy?
Oh, there's some definite roles. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is operating stateside. I mean, they also do work to assist us in overseas investigations, but they're a law enforcement arm, and so they've got a very different role in what they're trying to do. You've got the elements. Most of the intelligence apparatus is actually part of the Department of Defense. When you think of like the geospatial agencies, or uh, you think of the NSA, or uh, you start to see a lot of organizations that are actually part of the Department of Defense, whereas the CIA is separate. And so you could probably the CIA and the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, I mean, they have some similar roles because they're both working on all source, but the Defense Intelligence Agency is working on defense for the department, whereas the CIA is working on clandestine activities for the entire government. So there's uh, often when the military is doing something, you actually want to have a certain tail. You want to have a certain amount of attribution to what you're doing, because it's part of what the military is doing. We're trying to deter. We're trying to take actions, and we deploy carriers. We deploy air wings. We take visible actions to influence our adversaries, whereas the CIA definitely works from the shadows. And so uh, when you're the average person in the Army is going to be stovepiped within the Army. They're going to do some work across the joint community, but then you also do some work across all of the executive branch. But you definitely the average soldier spends all their time with Army folks, as opposed to actually even working with the Navy or the Air Force.
Yeah. When you guys, you mentioned some of your work has been about like how do you get resources into the Army from a cybersecurity perspective. How do you guys go about doing that? Because I imagine some of the best pen testers, some of the best security leaders, come out of corporate, or they kind of, grew up through that, and they might be valuable to the Army. And I know there's some programs. What have you guys found to be effective? Are you actively recruiting out of the corporate world where people can become an officer without prior military background, or where is that at today?
Well, there's a lot of different opportunities. One of the things that we were taking a look at just recently, when they were kind of looking at the force of the future type ideas, was finding a way that people could serve at any point in their career. So if you had somebody that was 45 years old and woke up and decided what they wanted to do was be in the Army, that you could bring them in. And we currently have the capability to bring people in at any grade up to colonel in the Army, if they have the skill set that you'd be looking for. But a lot of what we need to do is you have to have a certain number of young people joining the organization, because within the Army we tend to start with young people, and then they move on up and continue to serve with us. And uh, traditionally we bring in more young people than we than what we need at the higher levels, but we have a real training program where they're going to become proficient at what we're doing, and they're also going to have the ability to re-enter society at the end of their military time. In the Army, we have a lot more people that stay on for a career than, like, for example, the Marine Corps. With the Marine Corps, the vast majority of Marines are only going to serve one tour, and that will be it. And that's not a problem. That's by design. And once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. You're proud to have done that. And once you've served, whether it's a couple of years or 20 years, you've served. And so what we've tried to do is ensure that we have the traditional entry level jobs, because that's the thing that most people are missing coming straight out of high school, is any true signals of quality. Now granted, you could think of you could have existing code that you had done that was part of an open source type, like if you had done some work in the Linux kernel, you might have some things that you could share on GitHub that would be clear evidence of the fact that you were an expert or that you already had experience. But the vast majority of people that are joining the army join the army so they can gain that some of those signals of quality. Maybe it's certifications that a lot of our soldiers will get certifications while they're in the army. Some will get advanced or get undergraduate degrees or advanced degrees. But then quite a few of our soldiers will join and then choose to go to use their GI Bill to pay for college after they've had a chance to be in the Army. And all of those different ways of coming into the Army are all, really important. And it's, what we're really, both in the Army and in education, we're trying to set people up for the rest of their lives and to have better opportunities. And
So, what are some of the kind of roles like when we're recruiting for talent at Risk 360? I think most people, when they think of cybersecurity, they think of like penetration testing or hacking, that kind of thing, which is a very small piece of the overall cybersecurity workforce. What are the types of roles that the Army is looking for? I imagine it's all types, but how much of it is hacking versus something else?
well, a lot of what we do is establishing networks and running networks, and so um, you have to put the networks together that you're going to operate, and you have to think about security from the beginning so that you are not trying to add security at the end. And so those are all a part of running networks. That's really important. We also have what we call cyber protection teams, which are designed to help protect Army's assets. And so we've got all different kinds of networks they may be a part of our weapon systems, they may be a part of our IT systems, but we have the cyber protection teams, which spend their time as experts to try to figure out how they are going to protect something, or often they come after a breach to try to figure out how to solve the problem. We also, within our acquisition community, have a lot of pen testers, so you kind of go the whole gamut. And we also have offensive cyber units in the Army, but it's really you do everything from setting up networks to knowing how to protect them to knowing how to attack our adversaries.
So you mentioned that there are offensive. I don't even know how much is allowed to be talked about this, but in the Army, presumably, if we're doing offense, we're hacking other countries or whoever. What does that process look like? Are there chains of command where they're going after missions? Because when I think of Army, I think about the traditional in battle. You have a mission, you're going to go do something. Is it a similar command structure on the cyber side where there's a mission to accomplish, you get rules of engagement, and then you have an offensive cybersecurity team to go accomplish that mission? Or is it more like advanced persistent threat type of activity? What does it look like?
Well, if you think of what we're going to do with Army forces, you can start to think of what militaries do to make the governments choose to stop doing the activities that we want. And so if you think of our industrial control systems, the traditional way in previous wars of ensuring that a bridge, that tanks were not going to drive across the bridge, was that you could blow it up with engineers, you could bomb it. Uh, there's several different ways that you could destroy a bridge. But if you're destroying a bridge that has a industrial control system where you could instead open it, because we often found that we would bomb bridges and then you'd come in later and want to use them, but you had already destroyed them, so now you have to build new bridges. So how can you instead use cyber means to do something that you would do with other military means? So that's part of what we would think of doing is how could we have actions within a battle space that would help the commander? Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes on with regard to cyberspace that falls into the intelligence realm, where it's all about finding information. And so when we find information, we tend to be very sneaky. And so we have a whole group of people that like to to be on networks and not have people that they know that they're there. But then we also have the kind of the more I guess the what you think of typical cybersecurity. Whereas if you have someone that comes into your network, the first thing you do is try to kick them off. Whereas with the intelligence people, they might be thinking, "Ooh, let's see what they want to do. Let's see what they're interested in." So you end up with these different mindsets of of what you could be wanting to do. But the vast majority of what the Army is doing is trying to provide forces that will be able to be used by either by cyber command or by our combatant commands to uh, yeah, to advance the aims of the country.
Yep, makes sense. What about on the other side? We hear about Russia, we hear about China, we hear about North Korea. Are there adversaries that consistently you got the Army and others can attribute incidents towards? Maybe those three or others.
Well, you look at what what companies like CrowdStrike have done with Attribution and with Palo Alto Networks. There's some really interesting case studies in what they were able to do using open source intelligence. Like there's some neat research that was done by CrowdStrike where they actually had pulled off of Facebook pictures of uh, dorm rooms of people that they believed were involved in a particular hack, and when they pulled the pictures of the rooms, there were Chinese PLA hats in the room, and so it's kind of like, well, why would someone have a PLA hat in their room if they weren't a member of the PLA? And so you can kind of think, well, it could be the case that's not true, but the attribution that they were able to come to was all based on open source, and uh, it's really pretty fascinating what they can do. If the As far as when we look at what our government's doing, the the largest um, the largest intelligence apparatuses that we have, be it the Russians, the Chinese, or the U.S., we have a lot of information about who's doing what or who might be doing what, and so I think that the attribution or knowing what the different countries are doing it's a lot harder to actually hide because there's only so many countries that have the capabilities, and so when you do something, uh, there's going to be a certain amount of you can go through and say who could do it, who has a motive to do it, and kind of come up with an idea of who might be doing it. I mean, one of the things that General Nakasone has said just recently, the commander of Cyber Command, is that he's concerned by the amount of attacks that originate on U.S. soil that are probably not that's not U.S. attacking U.S., but it's foreign adversaries using our own infrastructure. And that's one of our blind spots because we don't observe the U.S. networks. We only work on the networks overseas.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So, we think about the different agencies and they're largely operating outside the U.S. Yet one of the things that is most popular here in the U.S. is the idea of our own privacy. The Snowden revelations around NSA and others, what Facebook and corporations are doing in terms of privacy. Uh, where are you at with privacy? Do you think about it in your daily life? Is it something that you're concerned with? Is it something we should be concerned with?
Well, it's definitely something that we should be concerned with, and I've got some students that are working on different privacy laws, and there's um, there's the GDPR regulation that came out of the
Yep.
European Union, and there's some standard laws now that are coming out of California that will quite possibly become de facto standards. And so you're really taking a look and saying, well, what are the elements of privacy that we would like to have in place before we kind of end up with standards without thinking about it? And so we're doing some research into privacy in that regard. But we all believe that we should have the freedom to participate in our elections, to openly consume media. There's so much that we expect, and uh, I think that if you've done a lot of traveling, you realize that not everybody has the freedoms that we have here in the United States,
Sure.
and if you go other places, you're under the laws of the foreign countries, and so that's pretty interesting to think about with regards to what you'd like to have with regard to freedom.
Yeah, yeah. I've been to China and I've seen the Great Firewall in reality, which is interesting because you're used to going to a hotel, you can get to anything you want. In some hotels, you can't, which is interesting. So the EU, you mentioned GDPR. So they recently invalidated a piece of legislation called Privacy Shield, and the justification behind invalidating that was they felt that the U.S. could subpoena companies and obtain EU citizens' data, and they were concerned about that. So they basically said, we want data to live in EU. Do you think what? So my question is, what's your sense for the amount of cooperation between corporations and the Army or other agencies? Is there a lot of cooperation there in terms of data sharing and things like that?
I think that our government does a good job of data sharing. Um, I think we try to work to do the best that we can, um, and we do need to have a lot of you've got the data sharing type agreements that you want to have in place, but it's really hard when you take a look at you take a look at what we've got with regard to the right to be forgotten. There's some really tricky. Um, I don't know. There's some tricky things when you try um, to decide whether or not someone's IP address is personal information, and whether or
Yeah,
not you can keep people's IP address.
yeah, absolutely. What's your personal ecosystem? Do you use social media and stuff, or do you have concerns about like what you use from a privacy perspective?
I, I use social media, but part of that is because just because when you're working with education, you have to kind of be out there in the world, and so I think that LinkedIn and the professional networks are really important. As are uh, things like Facebook. My brother and I back right at he was working for Microsoft at the time, right when we were kind of just getting started on social media. And so we set up accounts on all the social media to try to figure out uh, what what were the strengths and weaknesses, and kind of where Microsoft would want to go with regard to social media. And,
Yeah,
it's fascinating to have kind of been playing with these things for a long time. I mean, I mean, I don't participate in. No, I mean, I don't try to meet a lot of people on the internet that then become into real life, but I do contact a lot of the people that I do know in real life on the internet. And the other thing is that we just really, we've gotten to the point where we have these echo chambers that are being set up where people can find information with people that they believe are um, all these people that are very much of like minds. And
yeah,
it used to be hard to find people. I mean, I don't want to say crazies, but it's really to find crazies. And when you take a look at a lot of the hate speech and other things, these are crazy people, and you can find them on the internet, and then you can make these teams of people,
yeah.
which
We
is
all have a little
crazy.
bit of crazy, and you can find it if you're looking for it, right?
Yeah.
I know that there's some talk about, for example, Russia using that kind of stuff to tamper with elections or put out fake news or deceptive news. Do you buy into that? Is it something that is legitimately happening, or is it kind of hyped up?
I think that if you go back to we for on the SciCon US, our first conference that we ran, which was it was right at just before the elections when Trump was going to win, but we didn't quite know that he had won yet. And we had Dmitry Perevich gave a talk on Russian hacking of elections, and it was a great talk. It's on the internet. You can go take a look at it about the way that the Russians from the time of the czars thought about working with elections. And when you take a look at what they've been working on, we've seen evidence uh, like some of the big clashes we had like down in Charlottesville, where we had people running through the
Hmm.
crowd, and um, you had events that were set up that were two different organizations that were setting these up, and they were both founded out of Russia. Um, it's just that they it appears that they have a desire to create chaos, and so they've got their cyber tools at work in the information space to create chaos.
Yeah, I think we've always had propaganda. Like we've always had the Voice of America. You could argue for the U.S. or Russia Today. That's like more media centric, and I think in some ways easier to spot. Like if you're watching something that's like Russian television, but on the internet, like there's these what seem like trustworthy sources, but they're not. And I've always wondered like what kind of impact those really had. So, for example, in an election, does that really move the needle in terms of I know what's going on, but are people really changing their minds based on that? Do you have a sense, or have any colleagues that you've heard talk about like what's the volume? Is it like a significant thing that other countries are putting effort towards, or is it just kind of like they're doing it here and there?
Well, if you take a look at, there's some really interesting some TED talks and some other information out there that about the effect of the Russian influence on the Brexit vote.
Yeah,
And you you can see where they have influenced the votes of particular areas, and you had targeted ads to people in areas where they they quite possibly wouldn't have even thought about having leaving if they hadn't gotten these targeted ads. And then you get these groups of people where it's hard to counter what's going on. If you have ads going out on TV, then you're like, okay, I've heard the argument, I can counter the argument. But if when the discussion is happening in silent, and the people are being influenced without the ability for anybody to counter it, um, I think at that time we didn't even realize that we didn't even realize what was going on until the Brexit vote went the the opposite way of what most had thought was going to happen.
yeah.
So um, I
What
think that
about
it's yeah. Go
what
ahead.
about election security? Like ignoring the like literally like accurate counts of ballots. Is that something that you think about or concerned
Um,
with?
yeah, well, we had a dissertation just this last year on the election security, and um, I I think that we've got they've got some ideas that you can put into place, like ensuring you have a paper trail and ensuring that that it's auditable. That there's many ways to ensure that these elections are fair, and I think that the idea of stuffing the ballot box, we've heard for our entire life, you hear about random people that casted votes when they were dead, or that kind of thing.
Sure.
But we normally heard of those things associated with like mafia or something trying to organize crime, trying to take advantage. Um, we had the issue with the hanging chads that we all went through, where they were trying to argue about whether or not that was actually a vote for one side or the other. Um, I think that I think that we've got the ability to have secure elections, and I think that it's important for us to spend time to ensure that we understand what needs to be in the infrastructure so that it stays secure.
I always thought like blockchain could play a role at some point, like a distributed ledger that's auditable. Surely I always think to myself, we do millions and millions of financial transactions, more than millions, every day, and they're accurate. I've never had, too much issues with a bank account transaction. So surely we can solve this like once every few years voting issue. The technology has to exist.
Yeah, so
Um,
you want to make sure that you have a secure but yet private vote.
yeah.
And I think that's as you're trying to go through that you're trying to make sure you're using technologies that ensure that people that their vote gets recorded, that it's accurate, but at the same time that they can vote for whoever they want without repercussion.
Yep. So hypothetical, if you wanted to send a secure private message, how would you do it? Like something that you felt wouldn't be intercepted by domestic or international actors or companies. Would you mail it? Carrier pigeon?
Um, no, well, I think that you you can yeah, you can encrypt email and have some sensitive information that you can send. Um, I think that there's plenty of opportunities to actually go take uh, if you were doing something in advance, they always have the secure one-time pad if you were sending information to people that you were working with before. Um, but
You
the
can't say. I wanted
well,
to
I
stump you
just
with that
I'm
one.
trying to think. Most of the when you're working in academia, most of the information we're trying to share and the ideas that we have, we're trying to get out there. And so it's um, when you leave the military and you enter academia, you go from a keeping secret society to an open sharing society. So
Yeah.
it's quite a adjustment.
Yeah, I know you wrote or co-wrote a research paper on encryption. I think it was around quantum computing and encryption, which I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but I know that there's been some questions about maybe putting backdoors and encryption technology, or so if it needs to be audited or something that it can. Do you have an opinion on that? Should we keep encryption completely private and secure, or do you think if we put backdoors in it, there's enough, I guess, justification to do something like that?
I don't think you should. I think that there's no. I don't. I'm not a fan of backdoors. I'm a fan of strong encryption. And because if you put in backdoors, that's kind of cheating. You're supposed to have really, really hard math problems, and you get to try to solve them to try to decrypt things. And to have backdoors, that's just kind of cheating.
Yeah, if it's built by man, it can probably be deciphered at some point anyway. So,
Yeah, that's right.
especially when you get into quantum computing, I want to hear about that too, because that's part of the theory is, if you're using quantum computers, they could theoretically break any algorithm. So, can you talk about what was the nature of your paper, that research that you were doing? I think that was really neat.
Yeah, well, so part of it is trying to get to the cocktail party level of conversation, so
Mm,
that people have an idea of what's actually going on. Now, granted, when you're writing a paper for SciCon, that the audience is not your standard group, but we're trying to let people have a better idea when they talk about quantum computing. What are the what are the possibilities? Now, there's some algorithms where they become they just completely are broken. And there's other ones where the in order to have the same protection that we have right now, you have to double the key length. And so you start to look at breaking out what are the different algorithms, what are um, the algorithms that we've written for use on a quantum computing, how could it be implemented, and really where it sits on uh, what kind of methods of encryption we could go forward, or what kind of cryptography is the next kind of ideas. And they have an entire competition where they're trying to figure out what's going to be the best of the future competitions. And
what's your head
so
at? Is quantum like on the horizon? I'm not even tracking that. Is it? Is it here? Is it about to be here? What is your sense for where we're at technology
Well,
wise?
you have to talk about whether quantum technologies as a spectrum,
Sure.
because like an MRI is quantum technology. And so you've got quantum technologies, you've got quantum communications, and then you've got actual quantum computers. And but we're used to the binary nature of the bit just being on and off. And with entanglement, you all of a sudden are not limited to just storing one bit of information. And so that's when you start to look at the speed up. It's that's really where a lot of that speed up comes from. But it gives you some neat opportunities because with entanglement, if anything's tampered with, then you have a lot of different algorithms you could write where they're tamper resistant, because if it'll change all the information if they're tampered with. And so
What is
there's
entanglement? Can you give me the dumb person's uneducated? What is entanglement?
so entanglement is I guess there's like two things that are not together, and when
Uh huh.
we change one, it changes the other.
Yeah.
And but they're not physically connected. They're entangled in the sense where
Ah,
they can the changing one can change the other, or you can send information.
got it. This is
Um,
like the time travel thing, right? Where like you can change a neuron in one place and it would change the other one instantaneously, agnostic of distance. Is this the same kind of concept?
that's where you're starting to get into the kind of ideas you're starting to understand what entanglement means.
Got it. Very cool. So go on. Didn't mean to interrupt. So yeah. So with entanglement and quantum computing and encryption, is that from a quantum computing perspective? Do you think we're close to having like true use cases where people are using that technology, or are we already there?
Well, we have quantum computers, but they're very small. The number of uh, yeah, they're all very much in the research stage. So I think there's kind of a maybe a 10 to 15 year horizon before you're going to see the next set. But the big thing with encryption is that if you can start to encrypt things today that will be quantum resistant, then you don't have to worry about what happens in the future.
Yeah,
Because right now, if you have codes that you're using today that will be broken by quantum computing, you have to, well, do I care if somebody knows this secret in 15 years? You know, like if you and I are talking about something where, um, you know, it's very highly personal, or it's what we're doing for work, but it might have only a 1 year time span where it matters. You know, we're trying to get something out to market, we're talking about this, and so if someone siphons off those emails 15 years from now, they may be completely useless,
sure.
because you can break them, but the information's not worth it. Um, and so that's one of those things that you start to look at. You know, is there information that 15 years from now is still going to be valuable, and how can you encrypt that so you don't have it getting stolen?
That's that's interesting and also scary that that we have to think about that there's a lifespan on encryption due to the power of computers and quantum computing. But I guess that makes sense. Um, wanted to close today, Andy, and talk about some of the programs and work that you're doing at Marymount, because I know that's important to you and very interesting. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are you doing with students? Why should prospective students and researchers be excited about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we're doing at Marymount that are really exciting. One is working with information technology as an undergraduate degree and giving people an opportunity to focus in cybersecurity as well as data science at the undergraduate level. And at the same time, be have a liberal arts preparation, because if you come to Marymount, you have to go through the whole liberal arts curriculum, which for me is really exciting, but it also is something that's a lot like what we had to do at West Point. Everybody at West Point has to take philosophy. You're going to take psychology. And so some schools, when you're focusing merely on tech, you kind of lose out on that general um, well-founded person type approach. And so
Yeah,
it's really exciting to see the well-balanced students that we have that come out of Marymount, and then as they'll be able to go forward. And similar to what I had at West Point, where we had 18 people classrooms, the class sizes at Marymount are very small. And so when you've got 18 to 24 people in a classroom, you can get to know all the students, you can take care of them all, give them a little more of that individual touch that really will help them as they go back out into the world. And so when people go out into the world, then obviously they do a lot of work and do great things. But one of the things we found was that there was a gap in what was available for doctoral education, and we really found that there was a lot of professionals out in the cybersecurity world that had gone back to get a PhD and were all but dissertation. So they did all the coursework, but they kind of got done with the coursework, and at some point you start to lose focus. They never got their dissertation done. And so we created a doctorate in cybersecurity that would be entirely focused on cybersecurity, in the sense that it's a huge multidisciplinary field, but we weren't focusing on computer science with a specialty in cybersecurity. We weren't focusing on electrical engineering with a focus in cybersecurity, or any of the different ways that you could have an existing department add cybersecurity into what they were doing. And so we've got coursework that's based on the NIST work roles, so that anybody that comes through the program will have experience across all the different work roles that they would expect to be having to lead people in. And we also have classes that are in the research tools that people would learn. But we go through the process with a 3-course sequence to help people learn how to do research. Because what we're really trying to do is to make people what we like to call it, we want them to be practitioners. I mean, we're not looking at building academics, so we're looking at building scholarly practitioners, ones that understand when you have a problem that you go to the literature, you can go find out the way that other people have done it, and help people so that they think of how they would be able to actually solve problems at work in a scholarly way. And so it's a neat opportunity for people that are interested in cybersecurity and in having a doctorate in cybersecurity to work with a group of people from across the country. We really had we've got some great students, and some of them are in the area, but with the amount of the reality that you can go from learn from anywhere, we're making a lot of use of the distributed technologies to try to work with students that are across the country.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept, because cybersecurity is often viewed as a very technical topic. It's like IT or technology and cybersecurity. But when you think about the next generation of leaders that are going to be making some of these critical decisions, they probably need to know a little bit about ethics and leadership and research and decision making, and that's an important gap to fill. If people want to check out the Marymount University cybersecurity program, what's the best way to find that? Google it, or what's the best way?
Well, we're marymount.edu, so you can go to our website and you can go right to the programs that we offer for prospective students.
Awesome. Well, Andy,
but I think if you Google it, that's the answer on all IT professionals. When they need an answer, they Google it.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, thank you for your time today. This was a great conversation. Thanks for what you have done in your career and what you're doing, educating minds today. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, you can check out Tuesday Morning Grind on any of the podcast apps. You can also check us out on YouTube if you want to look at our beautiful faces as we wax poetic about cybersecurity. You can YouTube search Tuesday Morning Grind or Risk 360. You can do the same on Spotify or any of your favorite podcast apps. So thanks again, Andy. It's been a great conversation. Talk soon.
Thank you.